Welcome to another episode of Leadership Review. I'm your host, Carl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Well, we talk a lot about leaders in leadership. That's fair enough. But what about followers? In fact, followership study is a legitimate area of study. It is small, but it's growing at the moment. The modern-day followership theory is mostly based on Kelly and Shellef's work. Check out these articles if you're interested in reading them. In today's episode, we're going to explore and review Baker's article, Followership, the Theoretical Foundation of a Construct. Joining me today are Dr. Thomas Chen, a senior scholar at the University of Melbourne in Management Studies, and Ms. Sophie Lundgren, an experienced leadership coach at Endeavor Coaching Institute. Together, they will help us explore a clearer view of followership study. All right, Thomas, let's start with you first. Thank you so much for coming, by the way. Well, tell us, what are some of the interesting aspects of followership study?
It's rather interesting. The reasons for heavy emphasis on leaders rather than followers can be explained from four major aspects. The first is the model of the great man leadership. Daft mentioned in 1999 that early leaders were thought to be the great men, and that leadership talents and skills in these great men were assumed to be inborn. Hence, those without leadership abilities had no chance to acquire them. Followers obey directives and mimic their leaders' actions. The second reason is the notion of the heroic leader. Later in the 19th century, business leaders were regarded as heroic leaders for their outstanding business achievements, and that the followers of the heroic leaders were the powerless masses. The third aspect is the concept of idealized leader. Leadership positions were thought to be fixed roles. The fixed leader role was idealized and honored. It was also observed that due to idealization, people thought that planning, decision-making, and task responsibility were the jobs of those who filled the leader roles and seldom wondered if these functions could be achieved without the leaders. The fourth aspect of an overemphasis on leaders' role was that social change can affect followers. During the World War II, leadership lived in epic was embodied in the great men such as Churchill and Stalin. In the 1980s, the American industry saw a series of takeovers and downsizing. Power and responsibilities were delegated to the followers in most companies, but leaders found their followers were ill-equipped to take those responsibilities. Therefore, the focus was recentered on leadership.
So, did this change somehow?
In fact, there was a call to change the focus quite a while ago. The earliest advocates of followership theory emerged from around the mid-1900s. These people include Hollander, Steger, Zerden, Andrew, and Jones. Hollander and Webb proposed that the qualities associated with leadership and followership were interdependent. Hollander furthered that at least some of the time and to some extent, leaders are followers, and that the behaviors needed for a leader's role at a particular time were not limited to leaders alone, but instead followers could also demonstrate those behaviors. These advocates of followership theory are, to a significant extent, influenced by theories such as the social exchange theories, which states that members of a group contributed to the group at a cost to themselves and expect to receive benefits in return at the expense of the group. Another theory that influenced the active followership framework was the attribution and small group theories, which emphasized that the perceptions held by leaders and members of a group towards leadership is more important than the attention on leaders' traits and behavior. The active followership theory quickly gained popularity and endorsement in subsequent decades. Kelly's In Praise of Followers, written in 1988, mentioned that followers deserve praise and should be studied. In Shellef's book written in 1995, The Courageous Follower, Shellef emphasized the downside risks associated with the hierarchically bestowed leader power. He proposed a new model of leader-follower relations where followers should take responsibility to serve, to challenge the leaders, to participate in change processes when needed, and even to oppose leaders who has acted against the interests of an organization.
Well, that is some very, very interesting insight into this history and the theory. Thank you so much, Thomas.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Next up, we have Ms. Sophie Lundgren. Thank you, and welcome to the show again.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Carl.
Now, would you be able to shed us some light on some different themes highlighted in this Baker literature?
Well, broadly speaking, this literature is divided into 4 themes. Firstly, he states that followers and leaders are roles, not people with inherent characteristics. This was framed by Hollander in 1974, where he defined a role as a set of behaviours which are appropriate for the position which individuals fill, and that the characteristics should fill the demands of that specific role. Kelly further supported this definition in 1991, articulating that followers and leadership were indeed roles and not people. More importantly, that most managers could play the role of both follower and leader. Secondly, Baker writes that followers are active, not passive. Throughout most of the 20th century, specifically in America, scholars think that followers were viewed as passive, obedient, and having nothing to contribute other than manual labour. This continued into post-World War II era, where followers were once again viewed as obedient, but also dependent and loyal to a leader. The perception of the follower continued to be wholly focused on their ability to contribute through labour. In contrast to these more traditional views of followers, towards the end of the 20th century, other theorists began articulating that followers were an active party in the dynamic relationship between leader and follower. Barnard argued that followers were active in the relationship because without their consent and cooperation as the subordinate, then the leader had no authority. Litzinger and Schaefer takes Barnard's arguments further, stating that leaders' actions were determined by followers as they could grant and withhold their obedience, meaning that the leader must act in ways that were consistent with the organisational goals. The third theme Baker explores is that followers and leaders share a common purpose. Baker begins by drawing on Follett, 1996, argument that followers and leaders are in an interdependent relationship, meaning that they must share some common purpose as a result. Burns describes this shared common purpose as having inseparable functions, but clarifies this by stating that they are different roles. Gilbert in 1985 described the shared common purpose through the coined term psychological commitment, which is similar to the organisational psychological contract between a boss and subordinate, in which both parties share a commitment to the team organisational goals. The fourth theme is relational nature of followers and leaders. The earlier studies recognised the interconnection between follower and leader and advocated the importance of examining the relationship between them. The relationship is refined by followership theorists such as Berg, who promoted the idea of a collaborative follower-leader relationship. Potter, who promoted the idea of a partnership relationship between leaders and followers, in which the follower initiatives were as important as the leader initiatives. Kelly also promoted the idea of a follower-led partnership. There were leadership theorists from a leader-centric perspective. Contingency theories posited a link between a follower's actions and a leader's behaviours. Situational theories of leadership focus on a leader's ability to motivate workers or followers through situational control and design. Substitutes for leadership theory question the importance of leaders in all situations. LMX theory was one of the few leadership theories to recognise the follower's role in the leadership processes and to posit that both leader and follower shared responsibility for the success of their relationship. A new construct, or authentic leadership, called positive leadership. The model was authentic leadership and followership, emphasised the importance of self-identity in authentic followers. Some followership theorists noticed that although gender advantage had been explored in leadership theory, it had not been explored in followership theory.
Well, this sounds very, very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you so much, Thomas and Sophie. Well, followership study still has a lot more to offer. There are quite a few very interesting areas for us to tap into for further research, such as identification of the major questions and issues raised in followership theory, categorization of characteristics held by effective followers, identification of followership models and styles. So what do you think of followership? Leave your comments in the comment section below. If you like what we're doing, please click the subscribe button. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Carl. We'll see you next time.